The US obesity rate started increasing significantly around just before 1980. This was at the same time the Dietary Guidelines for Americans was published. The NHS released their Eat Well guide in 2016, still emphasizing a high-carb, low-fat diet. After what recent year do you think there was a small but significant rise in obesity? 2016. The increase of sugar consumption correlates shockingly well with obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. So why did our sugar intake rise? This was due to nutritional researchers who sold out and accepted bribes, otherwise known as research funding, from the sugar industry. Dr. Mark Hegsted and Frederick Stare took bribes from the Sugar Research Foundation. The researchers were paid the equivalent of $6,500, which is roughly $50,000 of today's money, to counter previous research linking sugar and heart disease. Their findings were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and then the war on fat started. Dr. Mark Hegsted was called a hero of nutritionists by a spokesperson of Nestle. Frederick Stare amounted almost $30 million in his career as grants from the sugar industry. He even said Coca-Cola was a healthy between meals snack. Who do you think paid him to say that? When this information was released to the public in 2016, the Sugar Research Foundation, now called Sugar Association, replied with their annoyance of clickbait and that the issue was non-existent. That is, if you class 180,000 people dying every year to sugar-related causes as a non-existent issue. But didn't the dietary guidelines that I mentioned before recommend to avoid sugar? They did. That's where it starts getting a little more confusing. Although these guidelines suggest to limit sugar, they heavily promoted carbs and even went so far to say that fats were quite unnecessary. In my opinion, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to avoid sugar and spiking your insulin when on a high-carb diet. It's interesting that the guidelines we see literally have it all backwards. We're being recommended the opposite of the diet that humans ate before obesity became common. Humans have never relied on high-carb diets. We've always had high fat and moderate protein. If 70% of the people in your country are overweight or obese, that's a massive indicator that your country's general nutritional advice is horrible and should be avoided.